how many buckets can you fill Breezehome with? The answer to that is many. Like more than 100. But there's more to it than that. So we're just quickly going to go over the start of the game, choosing a Breton and giving him the highly appropriate name of Bucky McBucketeer. Our hero narrowly escapes execution, kills a bunch of Imperials and a bear. At this point we need to buy a house, and there's a few in Skyrim to choose from. In the end, I did go with the one that the most players will probably first stumble upon, Breezehome. It's rather tiny, and thusly a good fit for this experiment as well. Breezehome is located in Whiterun, so we head there first thing we do. We can't buy the house straight away though, since the Jarl doesn't know us and won't let a stranger buy property inside his domain. Go figure. First we need to help his pet monk to get a hold of some stone tablet from a cave. I naively thought that I could just summon the item with the power of Todd Howard, the console commands. But although I could make the tablet appear in my inventory, it just wouldn't register as I had completed the quest. Same if I spawned it on the ground in front of me and picked it up. No response. So away we go to Breakfall's Barrow. We kill some bandits, slay some Draugr, shove a sword through the boss's chest and collect the Dragonstone. For real this time. When we come back, Jarl Balgruuf awards us with the honor of buying property in Whiterun, which means that we can finally begin what would turn out to be quite the ordeal. We head to the Jarl's lackey in charge of the housing situation and buy Breezehome. Since this is on PC, we can use the console command to skip collecting the preposterous sum of 5,000 gold, which will take us several hours. This also gives us the financial means to decorate the house should we choose to do so. We won't, however, since this video is all about how many buckets we can fit into Breezehome. Having furniture takes up valuable space, and as we notice when we enter, there are already a few objects in the house. I try to remove them, and although a few of them would turn invisible with console commands, most of them can't be removed. It's a shame, but there's nothing we can do about it as far as I know, and they don't take up that much space, so we'll still get a pretty accurate number when we count the amount of buckets. Oh, and by the way, there are 3 types of buckets in Skyrim, and we're going to be using the smallest one, since we should be able to fit more that way. And no, we're not going to be manually going around looking for a metric fuck ton of buckets. We'll be using Todd's tool to spawn them in. It would seem that the buckets spawn underneath you and in a circle around you. When spawning 10, 2 of them would clip into each other underneath our hero. When spawning 100, everything just clips into everything and causes massive lag. Well, at least until they start to unclip a bit. Some buckets never do though, and just keep wiggling around for eternity. After spawning in 310 buckets, the game just froze. But my PC was just fine, as we can see on the overlay in the top right corner. The numbers keep moving, but Bucky McBucketeer does not, despite my valiant efforts. So I tried again, reloading my save to an empty Breezehome. This time I spawned the buckets in lower quantity, ranging from 25 to 50, and I kept running around to try and unclip the buckets even more. I also discovered the magic number of 8, which prohibits the buckets from clipping at spawn. So I just kept summoning in buckets and tried to unclip them, which is when the laws of physics seemed to just stop working. I kept falling through the floor at times, meaning that I couldn't place all the buckets where I wanted them. That's when I had a brilliant idea and reverted back to an empty Breezehome yet again. By the way, you should like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. It helps smaller YouTubers like me immensely. So my flawless idea was to build a bridge from one end of Breezehome to the other, and to drop 8 buckets at a time, preventing or at least heavily reducing the buckets from clipping into each other. Alas, behold the dodgiest makeshift bridge in Skyrim history. It started out great. I kept track using pen and paper, drawing a line every time I spawned in a set of 8 buckets. So in the end, I just have to count the lines and multiply by 8 to get the total amount. Problem is, the game just kept freezing at some point. The highest amount I got to was 800 buckets, so I thought maybe the small location might be the issue here. So I went for the biggest space I could think of, where I could actually stand close to the ceiling and drop down buckets. As you can see, we're in Dragon Key. Using console commands, it was easy to fly up to the great wooden beam. Went well until I got to around 900 buckets, and then the game froze. So it clearly wasn't the locale that was the issue, and at this point I was pretty sure that my graphics card was the problem. I was using an old, well, semi-old AMD RX 590, which, well, apart from sounding like a jet engine when stressed, is a decent card. So I went online and ordered a used RX 6600 XT and tried Breezehome again a few days later. Using the same method as the previous attempt, I was able to raise that number of spawned buckets to 920, and then it fucking froze again. I've no idea why, but this seems to be the end of this silly idea. I guess we will never find out how many buckets you can fill up Breezehome with. By attempting to fill it up, that is. We should still be able to calculate it, at least the ground floor. To do that, we need to figure out the dimensions of a bucket and how big the ground floor of the house is. Now, I'm no builder, no mathematician, but I'm pretty sure we can figure out how big everything is as long as we have a source for a real-life length unit on something in the game, that is. And here we immediately stumble upon an issue. TheGamer.com lists the Breton race, the Breton male in fact, as being one Skyrim unit, which would be 178 centimeters or 5'10". And that article was updated in 2022, so it seems pretty recent. The Skyrim Reddit page says the same, however it's far older, back from 2015. However, this post I found from loverslab.com mentions something interesting, and that is that we should differentiate between Skyrim length units SLU and Skyrim height units SHU. Most available info on the height thing online is wrong, which someone had proven with a mod, apparently. I'm not sure exactly which source is more credible here, but Lovers Lab seems to have calculated more, so I went for that one. Now, the Breton male is one Skyrim height unit. One height unit is 182.88 centimeters or 6 feet flat. If we go into Photoshop and look at this still image of Mr. Bucketeer against the wall, we can measure how high things are in relation to it. What we really need to do now is to calculate the volume of a bucket, how many buckets fits into 1 cubic meter, the volume of the ground floor, and multiply those last two values to get how many buckets would fit into the ground floor of Breezehome. Using the measuring tool, we find him to be 10.7398 centimeters tall in this picture, which would equate to 182.88 centimeters or 6 feet in real life. The bucket next to him has two measurements that we need, the height and the diameter. The height is 2.6918, and if we take 2.6918 and divide it with 10.7398, we get 0.2506 or 25.06, which would be the percentage of the bucket's height in relation to our hero. And since we know his height to be 182.88 centimeters, we simply multiply it by 0.2506 to get 45.82. which is the height of the bucket, rounded off. I don't want to confuse you guys with an unnecessary amount of numbers. There's enough of them as there is. Doing the same calculation with the diameter gets us the number 51.93 centimeters. And why did we just calculate this? Because with these numbers available, we can figure out the volume of the bucket. The geometrical form most resembling a bucket would probably be a cylinder. And the volume of a cylinder is decided with this equation. Volume equals base multiplied by height. The base can be calculated by radius times pi, and the diameter is 51.93, so that divided by 2 is 25.96, which would be the radius. 25.96 times 25.96 times 3.14, which is pi shortened, is 2116.11. So V, volume, equals 2116.11 times 51.93, which equals 96,960 cubic centimeters. Lovely. So how many buckets fit into 1 cubic meter? Well, 1 cubic meter equals 1,000 cubic centimeters, so... Wait, what? 1 bucket is slightly more than 2 cubic meters? No, that would mean a bucket is about this big. After a quick Google search, I realized that I'm a fucking idiot for forgetting the third dimension and turning centimeters squared into cubic centimeters. So, 1,000 times 1,000 equal 1,000,000. Anyways, 1 cubic meter is a million cubic centimeters. So 1 million divided by 96,960 equals 10.31. So 10.31 buckets in 1 cubic meter. Now we just need the volume of the ground floor. Next up, we need the height, width and length of the ground floor to calculate how many cubic meters it contains. First up, we already have the measurement of Bucky, which was 10.7398 on the image. Because of the camera distorting the angles a bit, our hero is not in line with the wall properly. So we just take the wall height, which is 16.372, and measure the distance from the end of the wall to the bottom of Bucky's feet, which would be 1.3252. Then we take 16.372 and subtract 1.3252 from it, leaving us with the height of 15.0468. Now remember, Bucky's height was 182.88 centimeters, and if we take 10.7398 and divide it by 15.0468, we get 0.7137 or 71.37%. So Bucky is 71.37% as high as the wall. Then all we do is multiply 182.88 times 1.2863 and we get 235 centimeters rounded down. Measuring the length and width of the room is going to be a tad more challenging. I can't just take the image of Bucky and lay it down on the floor. Depth perception will skew the angle too much for it to give any sort of useful information. So I guess we're gonna have to go the more unscientific route of laying out buckets in a line and counting them. Yep, that's the best idea I could come up with. Since there is a fireplace on the ground floor, making measurements in a straight line will be hard, so we'll utilize the top floor while measuring. I'll be using the same buckets as before, since we already have a measurement for them, to get an approximate length and width of these rooms. And yes, it's technically one room, but I've divided this Tetris piece looking room into 2 cuboids. This is room 1, and this is room 2. Calculating the volume of a cuboid is really simple. Length multiplied by width multiplied by height equals the cubic unit. As you can see, I used the bed as a ruler of sorts, well, in the start at least, and yes, this took a while, but in the end I got 27 buckets representing length and 14 representing width for room 1. This length then turned out to be 27 buckets times the diameter 51.93, which is 1402.11 or 14.02 meters. This means the width turned out to be 14 times 51.93, which equals 727.02 or 7.27 meters. Using the same formula as before, we get 14.02 times 7.27 times 2.35, which equals 239.52 cubic meters. And the second room was 12 buckets long and 8 buckets wide, getting us a total of 60.75 cubic meters, using the same equation as before. Adding these numbers up gives us a final volume of 300.27 cubic meters. This means that the 300.27 volume of the house times 10.31 number of buckets per cubic meter equals 3095.8 or roughly 3096 buckets. That is if and only if I didn't royally fuck up my calculations somewhere. So if we could actually fill Breezehome with buckets without the game freezing up, we will be able to put roughly 3096 buckets on the ground floor, given that the stairs and all the extra furniture were removed. Just in case you were wondering. Want to see how I killed everything I possibly could in Star Wars? Click on the box that just appeared on the screen. What do you think of this video? Leave a comment down below.